Welcome, everybody. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce Chris Rurik as our speaker tonight. Chris is an educator and a novelist practicing his craft on his grandparents' Puget Sound farm up in Washington State, where he lives with his beautiful wife, Mimi, and his young son, George. But many of us know Chris from his many years in Denver, where he served just wonderfully on the DFO board of directors for several years. He helped write our Better Birding with DFO guide, and he led a lot of field trips, often at Bluff Lake, where that vermilion flycatcher was seen, and many other spots. In fact, I think I have to say my favorite field trip in DFO was a 2-day trip with just 3 other people down to southern Colorado, where we did a big day in Los Animas County just a few years ago. And Chris is just an incredible birder. He's great with his ears, and he's just a wonderful trip leader. So I will stop yakking, and Chris, take it away, please.
Thanks so much, Susan. I can feel the warmth and return it wholeheartedly. I love DFO. And I wish we could all be in a room together today. I have so many fond memories of my time living in Denver, birding with DFO members, and feel very honored to be speaking to you all tonight. You guys just had to torture me with a Denver County vermilion flycatcher right off the bat. I'm so jealous. Right at Bluff Lake, I can't believe it. Anyway, so the impetus for my talk today really is the 5-mile radius phenomenon, which is sweeping the birding world. And I will tell you all about it. But as I prepared and as I was thinking about DFO and the beauty of birding locally around your home place, it got me quite nostalgic for all the time that I spent birding around Denver. It also made me think about a number of wonderful birders in the DFO community. So while I'll start with the 5MR, the 5-mile radius, this talk is going to pretty quickly balloon out into an ode to the joy of birding near home and the power of building relationships with the birds and landscapes and people around you. I'll be sharing some of my own stories from my years careening around Denver County, often on bike, working the underbirded places, as well as the stories of others. Words might fail me, but I hope to express to you the joy of discovery, the adventure, the sense of rootedness and place, and of course, the incredible birds that are to be found within 5 miles of home. Let's start with the 5MR. If we were in a room together, I'd be really curious to have a show of hands to see who's heard of 5-mile radius birding. It's kind of become a phenomenon in the birding world over the last 2 years. And I've been kind of tracking it since the beginning. I don't know exactly how it happened, how it spread, but I've watched it grow and participated a lot. And it's pretty simple what it is. It's keeping track of the birds that you see within 5 miles of your home. That's pretty much it. Here's an example. The person whose circle this is lives right in the center of the red circle. That circle has a 5-mile radius, and basically they're keeping a list of every bird that they see within that circle. It's arbitrary and it's beautiful. It was the invention of a bird blogger. I'm not too into bird blogs, but this is one I've followed over the years. And her name is Jen Sanford. She lived in Portland and Vancouver, Washington at the time she started this. And she never really laid it out as a big thing. She just started doing it on her own and writing about it a bit. And it kind of gained steam slowly over time. She gave advice about how to approach thinking about birding in this way. She suggested finding a tried and true birding patch that you could return to again and again and get a lot of joy out of, always find interesting birds. She was really big on visiting random places that other people aren't birding. And this is a really big part of 5-mile radius birding. And uncovering the potential of places that you might not expect would have a lot of birds. She said find a gull field or a parking lot where gulls and other birds like that might gather. And she said keep an eye out for spots with owl potential. And this is early rudimentary 5-mile radius birding, and it gained traction through, I think, her blogging friends who started trying it out on their own, and it kind of spread through word of mouth throughout the birding community. And now we're at a point where you might read something like this on my own favorite bombastic bird blogger, saying many have found the answer to everything lies somewhere within their own 5-mile radius. Maybe I wouldn't say it exactly that way, but I kind of agree. The stakes are exactly that high when you get to know your local area and bird it intensively. In 2019, at the beginning of the year, Jen kind of threw out a challenge to folks who are reading her blog or aware of it, saying that she wanted to challenge everyone to bird their 5-mile radius in 2019 and see how many species they could come up with. And it was a challenge without a real way of comparing against each other, really a challenge against self. To her surprise, all of our surprise, I think, hundreds of people joined in. And this is really where the 5MR phenomenon blew up in the birding world. So for me, here's where 2019 began. In this wintry landscape. I wonder if any of you can guess what town this is. I was following my wife's work, and as the year began, I was dressed in a helicopter mechanic's snowsuit I had borrowed from my brother in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was very excited to find birds to add to my 5-mile radius list. Here's where we live, right basically in the center of town. And I'll show you the same circle on the eBird hotspots. So you can see my circle had most hotspots around Fairbanks, but it did impose limits on where I could go. And believe it or not, even in low temperatures like that, birds still do exist and can be found, although not many of them. Here is a perfect example of 5-mile radius birding. This place is called the Carlson Center, and you can see it's on the Chena River. It's just downstream from the power plant for Fairbanks, and so the river stays open all year because they're pumping warm water into it, and so waterfowl manages to survive there throughout the winter. And I liked going there because I could walk from our apartment through the wintry streets all bundled up, and get there, and there's steam rising everywhere, hard to see anything even 30 feet away. Looking through ducks. For the one that doesn't look like all the others, that's a common goldeneye that was a nice find for my list as 2019 began. But there were not many birds around, and pretty quickly I was reduced to taking pictures of rock pigeons with interesting wings. Slowly, my list grew. This is a common redpoll. And there might not have been birds around, but I was outside and I found myself in moments of great beauty like this. Here's a pretty uncommon dark-eyed junco. That eyebrow is not a field mark, it's snow on its face. This is an even more rare bird, if you can see what that is. It's an American robin. They're common in summer, but not winter there. A black-backed woodpecker, awesome bird. I looked for owls and failed to find any. But I was getting out there, challenged by Jen and the community of 5-mile radius birders. And we were able to do so much just right from home in Fairbanks. There's a pine grosbeak that I found just while walking through a random neighborhood, and it was the first one I had seen in Fairbanks. another example of 5-mile radius birding the spots that you wouldn't necessarily think to be going if you were going on a dedicated birding expedition. So any guesses on how many species I had by the end of my month in Fairbanks at the beginning of 2019? That would be 20, and I felt good about that. Well, then we flew back to Seattle, and this was my main radius for the year as February started, and you can see we're centered basically ideally for birding in Seattle. Somehow my radius includes all the major hotspots and some of my favorite places as well in the city. When I thought about my radius, I made this map because this is kind of what I picture or have in my head. You can see the 3 big parks with lots of species. Those are the main hotspots in Seattle. And then all these random things that have to do with birds or other aspects of life that to me kind of made up the whole picture of my birding endeavors around Seattle as a part of my life, going to work down at the aquarium, picking my wife up from work at the hospital. And yeah, one of the great things about 5-mile radius birding is you kind of build this mental map of different places for different purposes, different species that you might find. And of course, I went to the big hotspots a lot within my radius, and I saw great birds, pileated woodpecker. This is a fox sparrow, but a really interesting one that confused me and others, and I still don't know. It might be, it's not our typical city fox sparrow. Might have other subspecies genes. But I also spent a lot of time at a place that was really close to home. I could walk when I needed a break from writing, and that was Gasworks Park. And it's well known in Seattle as a sunset picnic spot, sort of a festival place. There's often crowds there. You would never think of birding it. And yet it was pioneered kind of before me by a young Google employee who was a birder and lived in the neighborhood and started finding some great birds there. And I followed his lead, met up with him and learned from his example. By putting it in my regular rotation and birding in one of the places closest to home, I started finding a lot of great stuff. These are 2 snow geese that spent a couple of weeks there. They're like country bumpkins in the big city. Golden crowned sparrow, hanging out with Buick's wrens, the local birds, and every so often finding something more interesting in the early morning hours, like this pipit. Now, before I go off really on my kind of philosophy on why bird locally, I do want to give you some more 5-mile radius resources that you can come back to and utilize. These are some tools that have been developed to easily map your circle. The first one is easy, the second one is fancy. One helpful hint is to make an eBird patch, and in eBird you can manually add each hotspot and personal location in your radius to a patch, and then you can easily track how many species you've seen. And really it's all about the community. The top link is to Jen's blog, IusedToHateBirds.com, and she has a good 5-mile radius FAQ page. And then Facebook group built up in 2019 continues today, and it's wonderful. People share their stories and finds, and it's a fun community of birders. Here are some FAQs that come up. One is, can I center my circle elsewhere if I don't like the way my radius looks? And the answer Jen gives is no. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of the thing. The point is that you're birding in your home environs. What if I have no hotspots in my radius? And she says, well, go find some. There's going to be habitat and there's going to be birds around you. If you don't use eBird, that's no problem. There's other ways to track it. And people have asked, what if a hotspot at the edge of my radius is split by the boundary? And she says she does her best to really map it and stay inside. And yes, it's arbitrary, but that's kind of one of the things that makes birding fun and can fuel the fires. But the most important question of all, and the one that I want to spend most of the time tonight exploring, of course, is why? Why do this? Why bird locally? Why am I spending my time in random community gardens, pocket parks, streets with big trees, when I could be building up a huge list and having amazing encounters with really special birds at the famous hotspots? Why bird locally? Now, Jen's written a number of things to answer this question and inspire us, but I want to start with this one because it resonates with me a lot. She said, exploring your radius will lead to finding new places to bird, including places no one else birds. Your sightings from these unbirded or underbirded places can be far more valuable than checklists at a heavily birded hotspot. With more bird sightings from a wider range of locations, data is distributed more evenly, painting a more realistic picture of bird frequency. And that has me reminiscing about when I first moved to Denver, and I was a young birder then. I moved into the Capitol Hill neighborhood near City Park, and this is the Botanic Gardens. Many of you probably know it well. Here's what my radius would have looked like had 5MR birding existed at the time. And as I looked at the hot spots, and back then, these colors were a lot lower, lesser. Denver County proper was really not heavily birded at all. People went to the Arsenal, they went to Cherry Creek, Chatfield, they went to Bar Lake, Golden area, Boulder, but the spots in Denver, saw a visit every few weeks or every month, and I just looked out and I thought, there's got to be cool stuff around here where I don't need to go far. And yes, I did look at the top 100 and I was like, maybe I can break the top birders in Denver County because I can be competitive at times. But I made a very deliberate decision when I moved to Denver and thought about my birding life to bird Denver County close to home, often on foot or on bike, and try places out. And I explored streets. I found places, pockets of habitat, so many creeks, so many bike trails. I really love the bike trail system in Denver. And sometimes just walking with new friends, getting to know the neighborhoods, it kind of all blended together, getting to know my new home place. And a lot of that happened through my birding endeavors and slowly getting a sense of what birds I might expect and where. A great illustration of this is this place, which some of you probably know, and I don't know if anyone would say they love it. Probably someone loves it. I came to love it. This is Heron Pond Natural Area, and it's a funny story actually. When my first visit there, I had read that Audubon was hosting a birding and biking field trip along the South Platte River, and I learned about it a few days beforehand, and it said just show up. So at 8 a.m. on a very cold morning, I showed up and no one was there. Finally, I called the trip leader, and I heard this very groggy voice on the other end of the line, like I had just woken her up, and I was like, I'm here. Like, is the trip? Is this? Am I in the right place? And she was like, nobody signed up. Nobody wants to go birding and biking. I'm going back to sleep. Well, that started my birding by bike career in Denver. Fortunately, I didn't let it stop me. And that day I went and explored Heron Pond. And those of you who have been there know that, it's right next to a giant recycling plant. There's often like trash in the trees. And I know when I was there first, there was sort of this sense of like abandonment and pollution. And I sort of very tentatively went around the lake checking it out. And my notes say that all the ducks seemed very timid. But I did in the bare trees see my lifer hermit thrush that day. And I did return several times over the next few months and tromping through the snow. Started associating it with American tree sparrow because I saw it there once. Of course, I never saw it there again, but still, I thought that would be a good place for that species. When spring came, I had some great post-storm birding there with sunny skies and plentiful birds like night heron, Swainson's hawk, warblers, and most surprisingly, a blue-gray gnatcatcher moving through a drainage ditch. And that kind of really got me excited about Heron Pond. Before I knew it, it was a regular part of my rotation of the spots around Denver that I was visiting. And I actually kind of liked the place. At one point, I found a Western wood pewee, which was a first in Denver for me. And by the next fall, I was leading a DFO trip there. And it was on a sunny day, 60 degrees, no one else around. And we all kind of like reveled in the beauty of birding that place, even if my participants were a little skeptical of my choice of field trip location. But we did see great birds, meadowlark, house wren, turkey vulture, and coolest of all, a couple of lesser goldfinches in a field of thistles. None of this I would have expected when I first visited that place. And as I built up my experience there, each visit felt like a new discovery was just waiting to be made, and they were. And I want to circle back to that quote from Jen about how valuable this kind of data is. It feels good personally to make miniature discoveries like that gnatcatcher, but it's also incredibly important in filling in the gaps in our birding effort, which is really, our birding effort is really research on trends in bird occurrence and populations. We tend to avoid the places like Heron Pond, the margins of natural and urban habitat, which can be polluted and unpleasant. Those are the very places we can learn the most about how human lifestyles impact the lifestyles of birds. Of course, noble scientific pursuit is not always the driving force for birding close to home. And when I think about that, I think of this place. I wonder if you guys recognize it and who you associate with this park out in the neighborhood that I knew as Stapleton. And that's, for me, that's Jason Bidgood. And I'm gonna just read, I asked Jason kind of what drives him to bird Westerly Creek Park and Sand Creek Greenway so often. And this is the answer he gave to me. He said, starting out, birding was only an occasional thing, something I did if I had the time. I'm not sure when it happened exactly, but probably in my second year of birding, I really got hooked. There comes a point when you are never not birding when you are outside. I was seeing birds while walking my dog and being out in the open space with my kids. I realized that I didn't have to drive to some of the more popular hotspots outside of Denver because I was seeing new birds, learning a lot, and not having to be away from home for hours to go birding. I usually bring my binoculars along because you never know what might be out there. And over the past 5 years, the minutes really add up. I've logged about 750 eBird checklists and found 145 species of birds in my patch, including a couple of unexpected rarities. And for me, one rarity he found that I thought was great was a scrub jay, which has been very hard to see in Denver County. Of course, you all know the rarities he's talking about are more along the lines of groove-billed Ani and hooded oriole. Again, jealous. But I really resonate with the way Jason talks about birding close to home and how birding doesn't need to be some kind of other activity, but can fit into your walks and play and the rest of the things you're doing. In my early years in Denver, this image was my gateway to birding, fresh air, exercise, and new friends. I was self-employed for the first time at the time, making my own hours and needing to find time to take walks, breathe some air, think, and get a distraction, often through birds, to reset from my work. And birding City Park for me was a very special thing for many years. But I'm going to come back to that later. Jason said, for me, birding a patch close to home was a convenient way to go from casual backyard observer to more focused real birder. Although my only goal was to learn what birds were around my patch, Doing so has taught me one of the best lessons a birder can learn. The more you look, the more you see. That was certainly true of this catbird. What about this place? Who do you associate with it? This guy, this is John Bright, who I'm sure most of you know. And he told me about birding out First Creek Trail area. He said, starting out, birding was only an occasional thing, something I, oh, sorry. Oh, I got mixed up. He said, I've been birding at the pond by Green Valley Ranch for over a decade, but just a little bit here and there, nothing in depth. The first time the open space trail opened up, it was a chance to get to places that I always thought should be good, but never had a chance to visit. Getting access was really nice, and it turned out that there were all sorts of unexpected species around. It has been a constant surprise. You don't get the massive variety that you would by traveling around, nor do you get a high count list for the year. What you do get is continuity in a given area and the ability to watch as everything progresses. The home birds mate, breed, disperse, the migrants come and go, and you learn about behavior and things that sometimes can get lost in a more rapid paced environment. I want to talk a bit about the joy of discovery that's possible in these kind of like new or tucked away places or underbirded places that you might find within your 5-mile radius. And with birds, your relationship with a place turns that relationship into an extended process of discovery. And it's dependent on the seasons, the weather, how development is changing in the area. And each visit has the possibility to deepen your relationship. And there's, I just find such joy in that sense of discovery when you keep checking the spots over and over, and these moments happen. Like I think it may have been John who found this group of lazuli buntings out at First Creek, and I went out there to see them and just felt so happy to be in a new place and seeing such a great bird. Of course, after I moved away from Denver, he found birds like this Blackburnian warbler. It's amazing what he's done in that area. And the extended process of discovery is true not just of what birds might be in a certain place, but it's also true of the entire landscape of your 5-mile radius. 5-mile radius birding isn't just patch birding. Exploration and discovery is really key to the whole thing. I personally love the feeling of being out exposed to the world on foot or on bike, how you have the sounds all around you, the feeling of the weather, the people, no shields or glass to muffle the realness of the place. And you know, so much to discover out in the world. This is a pocket park in Seattle that I discovered in 2019 and revisited several times just because I liked the place. And biking, not even birding, I discovered a neighborhood, a ridge where band-tailed pigeons were residents year round, and they continued to be this year in 2020, and never would have found it had I not been attuned and open to discovering something new in an unexpected place. And this is important when it comes to a true understanding of the birds around us. And I really resonate with a long post, kind of a diatribe that was made by a birder named Justin Stahl to the San Diego listserv, where he's talking about 5-mile radius birding, and he's calling out those who are celebrated for having big year lists, because that has become such a big part of birding culture. He wrote, while some think of big years as primarily exploratory, long year lists have increasingly become a product of how successful a person is at chasing birds found by other people, with little time devoted to exploration and a great deal of time earmarked for running after reported rarities. And he quips that Sisyphus must have been a year lister. And then he goes on to describe the 5-mile radius challenge. And he says, not all circles are equal, and the competition was really just intended to be with yourself. How many birds can you find, regardless of what others in perhaps better locations are finding? Where to get shorebirds if you're landlocked? checking that golf course pond repeatedly in hopes of a snipe or spotted sandpiper, scouring small parks or residential streets for a rare warbler or vireo versus visiting the same famous hotspots every day, and so on. Exploration and discovery is a major part of learning the status and distribution of birds in your neighborhood, your county, or your state. What is expected and not expected, when and where. And I'd add to that, and there's still plenty of room for adventure within your radius. I have done several big days all on bicycle, and did one in Colorado and found 101 species, did one in Washington, found 106 species. And when it came time in May to do a big day in 2019, I decided to do it from my apartment door, all within my 5-mile radius, carbon free. And I wish I could tell you all the stories for that day, from that day, but I'll take you along briefly along for the ride. And hopefully if you get motion sickness, you might want to look away, because birding with me on bike is kind of like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And yeah, I wish I could also convey how much I love big days by bike. I'm pedaling as hard as I can. The wind is flying in my face. When I hear something tantalizing, and screech to a stop, and while my heart is pounding and my breath is sucking, I have to instantly transition into that birding mode, where you're silent and trying to be attuned to the smallest noises around you. And for me, it's like that rush you get when you jump from a sauna straight into a snowbank and back again. That day I found the best bird before sunrise, a Harris's sparrow in Discovery Park. Warblers were moving in waves up the bluff tops. At my lunch spot, which was also a scoping spot, I had to wait for 15 minutes while a couple of middle-aged women blocked my view because they were blowing bubbles like kids. And then a few minutes later, a mom walked up to me and asked if I was filming trains for YouTube. I wish I could tell you about all the spots I biked through. This is where I found Stellar's Shade because I knew they were in that neighborhood. Pedaling madly. It's hard to describe how long and hot and grueling a day like this is. And if you've done a big day, you know how long they are. The hours stretch on, but just imagine replacing the parts where you drive and get to rest your legs with even more intensive exercise. But when you're driven by the knowledge that there are more birds to find, the adventure of the thing just keeps you pedaling like mad. I was happy to find these shovelers still around and a bald eagle walking on water. It was hot. It was miserable. It got really quiet. Fortunately, there was my favorite taco truck in the radius to keep me going. Yeah. Doesn't this look like perfect cinnamon teal habitat? Not on that day. It was kind of, tired, hot at the end of the day, no birds, didn't know what to make of this dog on wheels that I saw going off into the sunset, but I kept at it and decided to return to a place I had already been, and found a Virginia rail grunting in the reeds, and still another new discovery to be made, a solitary sandpiper just after sunset, county lifer, and a great cap to the day. In the end, I saw 84 species, biked 24 miles and walked 12 plus miles. And I just love the adventure and the challenge of it, and doing it close to home in my radius meant that I had even more stories to tell at the end of the day than on my previous big days. And the 5-mile radius, it's all about that, having that arbitrary challenge and pushing yourself into adventures right close at home. Anyway, to shift gears, pun intended, I want to go back to something both Jason and John touched on, and that's what it's like to have a relationship with place. And I want to start with this place. I already mentioned how special it has been in my life, but there's someone else who I associate really strongly with City Park in Denver, and that's Pat O'Driscoll. I asked Pat what he thought of City Park the first time he birded it, and he told me in April 2013, I read a Co-Birds account of a DFO field trip in City Park. I was just beginning to bird after years of casual, sporadic looking on my own. For 5 years, I had visited the park not as a birder on weekend walks with my girlfriend, who lives 3 blocks west. I had no idea City Park was such an avian oasis. When he told me that, I went back and looked at my old checklist. And while I wasn't on that DFO field trip, I had the previous day passed through the park 3 separate occasions. The first time birding, the second time walking to get Caribbean food, and the third time on a test ride of my newly reconstructed bike. And there were great birds around: phalaropes, blue-winged teal, eared grebe, Bonaparte's gulls, avocets, yellowlegs. Well, Pat told me I went out the next day with binoculars and came back with 28 species on my list, all on my own. I was floored and hooked. And I asked him what he thinks of City Park now. And he said, after 250 plus visits, it remains one of the most unexpectedly birdie places I've ever been. I mean, all those people in a well-used urban green space 5 minutes from downtown, concerts, fun runs, fundraising events, festivals, and still at least 125 species of bird a year regularly find food, water, and refuge there. I asked him why he chooses to spend so much of his time birding close to home. He said, first of all, convenience, because he lives a mile from City Park. And second of all, he just has a fascination with the place. It's 142 years old. It has a sizable nesting colony of water birds. It's a winter waterfowl magnet, and it has varied habitat in an urban island. And I really relate to his fascination with the place and all that happens there. Although I kind of have to laugh because I look back at the first checklist I ever submitted from City Park, and my notes said something along the lines of, well, I'm pretty disappointed at how homogenous this place looks. Fortunately, I kept coming back and learned there was a lot more than met the eye. And isn't that, that's what relationships are all about. A shared experience and understanding that can only be built over time. And putting yourself out there, putting yourself in proximity to allow things to play out and to be there for the special moments. And so many memorable birds in City Park for me. There's that avocet that day. Dreadful birds too. Birds that were confusing and helped me learn. Just so many moments like this, passing through, watching birds, sometimes with friends or family, or sometimes just surrounded by the birds that I came to know. And speaking of, getting to know individual birds, no better example than this guy or gal, who I'm sure you all know. But when I think of people who have relationships with certain birds within a place that they know intimately, I think of this place. Anyone recognize it? My first visit here was biking through on the Highline Canal, and second visit was scouting for a birdathon I was doing, and I thought the place was pretty dead. Driving with my windows open, I had a trouble finding any birds at all, but I kept returning, kept trying, which speaks to how determined I was at that time to prove that places close to home could have awesome birds. But my eyes were only really opened when a certain someone was on a field trip that I was leading at Fairmount Cemetery. And that's Karen Drozda. She told me this: I would consider my home turf walking across the street to Fairmount Cemetery. The community where I live has a wide variety of trees, so I bird the minute I leave the house. I usually hear and see bush tits and red-breasted nuthatches the minute I walk out the door. I've lived in this neighborhood for 27 years. The cemetery has the largest arboretum in the state of Colorado. The variety of trees is fascinating. The Austrian pines have attracted unexpected woodpeckers. One Christmas, I observed a Cassin's finch feeding with house finches. What a Christmas gift. Birding close to home gives me the opportunity to choose sit spots in the cemetery and observe the behavior of all birds throughout the seasons. I know the habitats well and know where to look for expected species. I can also go birding without planning a route, driving, and not impact the environment with a carbon footprint. Neighbors who explore the cemetery share their sightings with other neighbors. Nothing is more exciting than to have months of great horned owl observation from courtship to fledging. That trip I took with Karen, she was tracking a red-tailed hawk nest and keyed us in on to individual birds. And it's awesome. And getting a precise feel for a spot and the birds in it also applies to the landscape of your 5-mile radius. And not only is it low carbon footprint birding, like Karen mentioned, but I've seen it lead again and again to conservation actions at a really granular level, at a really human scale. And I think that the Colonial Waterbird Monitoring Project that Pat has been leading at City Park is a perfect example of that. And then knowing your places so well, and the birds within them so well, means that when the unexpected birds do show up, they're that much more special. And you know, I had seen nice birds, nice ducks come to City Park, but when I came in one fall for a quick minute of birding and found a black scoter next to a surf scoter right in City Park, I was pretty dumbfounded. That is still such a memorable pair of birds in that place, because I had been birding it so much that I knew, you know, how special it was. Also found special birds at Fairmount eventually, like this Harris's sparrow. And one of the last times that I went birding in Denver before I moved away in 2017 was at Bluff Lake. And some of you know I worked at Bluff Lake for 5 years. And that evening was a Blues and Brews fundraiser. My fiance was with me, my parents were in town, and I was surrounded by folks from the community in that area who I had grown to know over the years and worked with their kids. Just a really warm atmosphere. And at some point, my now wife, and my parents and I split off, and we took a walk around the lake, one last walk around the lake, and on a trail that I had walked, you know, countless times with students from all over Denver, showing them chickadees, flickers, stalking mule deer with them. We had an encounter with a bird that has remained totally seared in my memory, and my emotional memory, and that was this worm-eating warbler. Apologies for the photo. Yeah, lightning strikes in special places. Birds themselves can be magic, and the moments that we have with them can transcend the birds themselves. And sometimes it all comes together around a certain place, a set of people and stories. And in hindsight, it's like a golden age. And for me, that was true here at the Botanic Gardens and Cheeseman Park next door. But I'm going to let this guy start that story. This is Jared Del Rosso. Some of you may recognize him. And he said this: in 2015, I became a local birder. I traded the long drives and chases for lifers, rarities, and other novelties for time in nearby habitats. I lived in Cap Hill, an overpaved, overdeveloped, and yet somehow still developing neighborhood. The nearest hotspot to my studio apartment was Denver Botanic Gardens, and adjacent to the gardens, Cheeseman Park. Now, birders ironically refer to Cheeseman for its decent collection of spruces as Denver National Forest. The park is better known for its ghost and its reputation for seediness. The gardens, for its part, is known for magnificent but heavily trafficked collections of native and exotic plants. Birds, less so. At the start of 2015, eBirders had reported 82 species of birds. My ambitions were modest, said Jared. Good thing too. Over the first 3 months of 2015, during which I made 23 visits to the park and gardens, I'd seen but 37 species of mostly ultra-common birds. The most notable were late Say's phoebe and yellow-rumped warbler, which are really not all that uncommon around Denver in winter. Things changed for me on Friday, April 3rd. That morning, it snowed. The snowfall delivered my lifer sage thrasher, which I found dashing around Cheeseman's mulched trees with the robins. It also brought a messy woodpecker of inscrutable origin, a possible red-naped by yellow-bellied sapsucker. The next day brought sun, crowds, volleyball matches, and red crossbills. My first few years in Denver, I'd chased reports of crossbill throughout the mountains. I'd found one previously, but here, just a mile or so from my apartment, was a flock of 16. The crossbills stuck around for the better part of April. Almost as soon as they left, a common porwell arrived. I found it on my birthday, inadvertently flushing it from the Botanic Gardens lilies. The porwell was a revelation for me. A bird easier to hear than see, hidden in plain sight along the garden's most popular trails. It suggested just how much might hide away among us, repurposing our urban landscape. That these discoveries can be made so close to home, often in places where no other birder is looking, makes them all the more rewarding. And at about the same time that Jared was having these experiences, I had just moved closer to Cheeseman Park, and Cheeseman became my new city park. I went walking there a lot, reading, slowly tuning in, and at that time I sort of had my set route around Denver County looking for birds, going to City Park, Westerly Wetlands, Bluff Lake, even the damn DIA loop. But I started tuning into the birds around Cheeseman too, and the gardens, and noticed lesser goldfinch, green-tailed towhee. I realized that it was right in the flight path of double-crested cormorants and night herons from City Park. And in the spring, I was able to refine that porwell that Jared had found. And it had moved out to Cheeseman, I guess after a night out on Colfax, having some beer. Came back later in the day for a better picture of it. And we started texting what we were finding and running out to see each other's birds throughout the summer and that fall. On the 21st of September, he found a brown thrasher in the gardens, and I went out soon after. I missed him, and I couldn't find the thrasher, but I did find a Nashville warbler. And then 2 days later, it happened that we finally arrived at the park together. And for the first time that we had actually met each other in person, we found the brown thrasher together. And then, as if to inaugurate a new friendship with some real magic, we found this bird, a Philadelphia vireo, another bird that is seared in my memory from birding close to home in Denver. And the friendship was magic. We went birding together often, went walking and talking, and we talked about far more than birds, especially writing. Jared's a professor, and we were both facing challenges with the manuscripts that we were working on. We found out great birds. By the end of the year, the list for the hotspot would grow to 123 species. But soon Jared moved away. He moved south. And someone else that we all know and love moved into an apartment just on the other side of the park. That's Rebecca LaRoche, and she became my new birding buddy around the park, and has written beautifully about how walking regularly in the park taught her how to bird, as well as birding with DFO. She said she never expected to find reported birds like common porwell or Philadelphia vireo, but I knew they could be seen. What I didn't expect was the way that individual birds would reveal themselves to me, how the seasons would change incrementally. A pair of red-breasted nuthatches were shuttling food to and from a cavity, and within a couple of weeks, a very vocal fledgling hovered around the hole. Every walk, and over the next 2 years, I would survey the park almost 150 times, a new wonder emerged. A new relationship started. Again, Rebecca and I, our relationship sparked by birds, but transcended birds, and our time in those places, everything sort of melded together. Soon Jared was reaching out saying that he was seeing we were birding these places a lot and he missed it. And we sort of all formed this bond together, trying to identify difficult flycatchers, talking about the birds we're seeing. And amazingly, in that following spring, Rebecca found a porwell in the gardens. And yeah, it was like we were all electrified. And a week later, the three of us led a DFO trip and in the gardens. And while we failed to find the porwheel, we were able to show other birders all these amazing spots, micro spots that we had found and had memories of, and birds that were there, the rock wren in the cactus garden, the empids. We kept birding together, owling along the canals when Jared got really obsessed with imitating screech owls, and building. Well, yeah, words don't do justice to those days and the relationships we built. And before we knew it, life was moving along, and Mimi and I were about to move away, and we went back to Jared's haunts to have our final time birding together. And I'll let Rebecca take over the story. She said, our late May return to Arapahoe County was bittersweet, as we knew the three of us would not be birding again together anytime soon. Adding to the melancholy was the waning spring aspect of the day. We saw an orchard oriole, grosbeak and buntings, a Swainson's thrush. These were the last of the migrants, even the birds of summer. Migration was done and Chris was leaving. But in the last stop, the sun was high and all of us were getting peckish. We walked along a bramble, hoping for a late coming warbler, and returned to the path that crossed an open lawn. And suddenly, a robin-sized brown bird with wide wings and white tips on his tail flew up about a foot above the ground, disappearing over the knoll just ahead of us. It was a porwheel. Still crazy, those porwheels are there. Well, to bring this story full circle and the story of the 2019 5 Mile Radius Challenge full circle, a lot of people participated from a lot of places. There, you can now find countless 5 Mile Radius patches in eBird, and most amazingly, it's a part of the birding lexicon. There's graphs, but really, as Jen wrote, the goal was never to be competitive about it. The amazing thing is that it worked. A lot of people chose to bird close to home this year, to drive less and explore more. And the Facebook group really was the place where stories were shared and people inspired each other with stories like the ones I'm telling you. As for my own 2019 5 Mile Radius tally, I know you're all waiting on the edge of your seats. Drum roll. I have no clue. I have no idea. Many birders did track their numbers throughout the year and got a lot of joy out of it. But for me, birding close to home became part of the flux of life, and we were moving a lot. And it was really about the moments and the stories rather than the numbers. As Jared has written, local birding is ecological birding. That is birding in a web of relationships. And in my mind, those kind of relationships extend beyond the physical players in our local ecosystems and into the realm of story and memory and emotion. But here at the end of the presentation, I do want to give you a sense of the end of the year, a few more cool bird pictures. This is up in Anchorage now, where I got to hang out with baby northern shovelers and run into bears and go birding in places like this. And this is very close to Anchorage proper. This is a white-tailed ptarmigan. We went back to Fairbanks and back to Seattle for a month when this guy was born. And I found myself living for maternity leave on my great-grandparents' farm in South Puget Sound, and looking out every day at birds like these while we got to know our new baby. And that's how 2019 ended for me. And really, I measure it in stories, moments, experiences, small locations, rather than any numbers, although the numbers are fun to track. And yeah, now we're living here on the farm full time, and which is full of 4 generations of life and stories, memory and connection. Most of my birding right now is walking the fields and trails here. Actually, it's slipping in and out of birding mode as I go about my business, repairing a house, working on the farm, raising a son, supporting my wife, gathering material for my writing. And the joy of birding interpenetrates all aspects of my days. and it feels like the walls that once kind of separated the activities of my life, or the parts of my endeavors are breaking down, and everything is related. The stories move fluidly from birds to family to work to joy and pain and back again. And I get to feel the landscape moving and breathing around me, just like I'm moving and breathing. So I'll leave you with that. The birds are all around. I'm buoyed up by them and constantly surprised by them. And I constantly, even though I'm almost exclusively birding around the farm at this point, I'm constantly have that feeling of discovery, and hidden corners waiting to be found, and relationships waiting to be built. And I believe that this kind of birding life and experience can be had no matter where you live, whether it's a farm or in the middle of a city like Denver. And I do think that the 5-mile radius is a great way to organize it and explore it. And while I have you on the phone, my beloved DFO members, I do want to just extend the invitation. If anyone wants to come out here to the Pacific Northwest and go birding, especially post-pandemic, the invitation is open. I'd love to host any of you, a group of you, take you out birding and look for birds like these. And I'm sorry, I'm just putting common boring birds on these pictures. But we can comb through all the Pacific wrens, harlequin ducks, and varied thrushes to look for a real rarity that you like this western bluebird. That would be exciting. With that, I just want to say thanks, and I really am honored to talk to you. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Susan to lead a Q&A session. Thank you.
Chris, I just wish you could hear all of the oohs and ahs as you shared all of those wonderful photographs with the group. It's one of the downsides of presenting virtually, that you don't get to hear the audience reaction, because I guarantee you they were out there. And yeah, we do have a few questions. So I'm going to start with one from Chet Chichevsky and Elena Klaver, who asked, well, actually, how do you draw the 5MR circle? Now, they asked this question before you answered that in the presentation, but the 5MR circle site is, I believe, at, you may know this, Chris, but I just checked it out and wrote it down. Should I?
Yeah, the easiest way is to just go to Jen's blog, which is iusedtohatebirds.com, and she has a FAQ there with links to all these things. And hi, Chet. Hi, Elena. Good to hear from you guys.
That really is the easiest way to get there. iusedtohatebirds.com.
Yep.
So it's a wonderful blog. Yeah. This is a question from Linda and Roger, both asked very similar questions. What were concerns about climate change and carbon footprint part of the 5MR philosophy? Is that what helped get it started, or is that just a side benefit?
I don't know if I can answer that. Jen hasn't written much about the origin of the idea for her. I know for a lot of us, it is a big part of it. I know for me personally, I do think about, if I have the choice to go on a bike ride from home and see less birds versus drive out to like 2 buttes or something, I'm definitely going to be tempted to do 2 buttes. And none of this, by the way, is to say you shouldn't bird in other ways also. It's not supposed to be exclusive. But for me, the thought about, lowering my carbon impact on the world around me is a really big part of why I like to be on foot and bike.
Yeah, I'll bet it's easier to find parking places too.
It's true. You can, slip in and out so easy. I have great memories of like coming back along along is it called Cherry Creek Country Club in South Denver, and at rush hour, and just the great feeling of being on my bike on the bike path and speeding past all these cars stuck in gridlock. One of the best feelings in the world.
We had another question, and I'm sorry I forgot to note the name. Has eBird yet acknowledged or provided some kind of a tool or widget on their site so that you can kind of flag your 5MR eBird lists when you post them?
Oh, that's a great question. And no is the answer. Like I said, making a patch is the best workaround that we've found so far. But it's clumsy and it takes some time to set up and it's a little awkward. But we should definitely push. Maybe I can call up Taylor Long, who's a former DFOer who works at eBird, get in his ear. I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I bird in my 5MR, but I haven't really found a good way to flag those lists. So I don't actually know what my count is.
Hmm.
So what is the most unusual or unexpected bird you've seen while you were out on a 5MR trip? I mean, is there one that just pops to mind?
Yeah, I've had a lot of 5MRs over the last 4 years. That Philadelphia Vireo is really big in my mind. More recently, like I said, I've been birding at the farm a lot, and the other day I was taking the trash up the driveway in the morning and heard this rich rolling, bugling call from just behind me, and sandhill cranes were flying past, and that was it's a really good bird for the county here, and unexpected and sort of like I said, like in the flow of regular life, and it's just special when it happens in that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
great.
that was the most recent one. That's been really nice.
And I think we've hit all the questions except one. So this will be the last one. What tips do you have for people who might want to try birding by bike?
Birding by bike specifically. Good question. I wish that could be a whole presentation in and of itself. And there's a growing community of us who are into it and trying to do it. I would say, like, just get out there and do it. Don't be fancy about it. All you need is binoculars and a bike. There's really not like a huge barrier to entry as long as you know how to ride a bike. I think you can go do it. And even if it's just taking a bike in your car and starting that way, if you feel safer, if you don't live on a safe street like my parents, when I start from here, I have to get a short car ride.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's really helped recently is getting a binocular harness rather than just the neck strap, so that my binoculars are not constantly banging my knees. And I don't know. I think you could probably see in the picture over the years, I've kind of like developed the setup that works for me. I've got panniers on my bike, and I put my scope and my tripod in, and all my snacks, and
Yeah.
you know, try to be as self-contained and self-sufficient as I go as
Mhm.
possible. But really, yeah, I'd say like start small and just take a spin around your neighborhood and see what birds you see, and kind of start to experience what it's like to hear the bird sound around you, and you can get a sense of, like, when you're going faster, how much you hear slower, and how you want to pace yourself.
Okay. And I actually did overlook one.
Oh yeah.
This will be the last question. What equipment did you use to take these wonderful photos?
Oh, it is a Fujifilm camera, which is, I think, called a FinePix S1, and it's one of the, like, quote unquote super zoom cameras. It's not got the biggest sensor, so it's not like magazine quality shots by any means, but it does the job for me. It's lightweight. It was about $300, maybe less, and man, I've used that thing a lot. And I got that because I'm not trying to be artistic. I'm trying to document birds along the way, whether
Mhm.
they're rare birds or birds that are meaningful to me. And I couldn't recommend a camera like that more highly for birders. I think it's perfect.